Hi again guys, and welcome to episode 37 of GT Masters, the review series for Gran Turismo's selection of GT style race cars, many of which on Gran Turismo are actually technically not real. They are PD originals, or Polyphony Digital originals, which is fictional. In effect, they're made up race cars. Many of them are based on, or at the very least inspired by, real race cars, but they're not in themselves real. And this is one of those vehicles. This is a PD original. It's the second of our two Lotus Elise based race cars to be featured in the series. We already featured the older shape model, which I said is pretty good for one make racing, but its range of effectiveness is a lot more limited than some, in a similar way to the Suzuki Cappuccino and also the muscle car based race cars. This car suffers from that to some degree, but I would say actually has slightly better range of effectiveness than the other Elise. Now, as far as spec, this car is powered by a 1.8 litre engine. It puts out 348 horsepower fully tuned, 215 foot-pounds of torque, and being a Lotus, you'd expect it to be pretty lightweight. And it is. It weighs 720 kilos. As far as horsepower per tonne, it puts out a perfectly respectable 483, and the PP is, I would say, a little too high, but as is the case with some other lightweight race cars, understandably so. It sits at 568 PP fully tuned, which isn't ridiculously high, but is a little bit too high, considering its straight line performance isn't that strong compared to, say, a GTR or an R8 or a BMW M3 or pretty much any other mainstream higher powered GT car. As far as its price, it's actually a little bit cheaper than the older model Elise at 134,500 credits. Now, 134 grand is quite a lot for a Lotus Elise, but another way of looking at it is that that is quite a low price for a GT style race car. So the question is it worth that price? Is it worth checking out? And if so, what's it good for? Well, as far as whether it's worth that price, I would say no, but also yes. As far as pure performance, there are certainly vehicles which are quicker for that price or less. However, 134 grand for a newer shape, premium spec, actual race car, a fictional race car, but a race car nonetheless in the game, is not a bad price. That does make it one of the cheapest race cars in the game. As far as whether or not you should buy it, well, that depends. As I said just now, it does have, in my opinion at least, a little bit better range of effectiveness and competitive use than the other Elise, but not by much. The straight line performance is, as you'd expect, not that strong, as we already said. So the main question is, does the handling redeem it? Because if you have a car that has incredible handling, such as the Cappuccino race car, it can sometimes save the car, in effect, and give it usefulness where it may not usually have. Whereas if it does have that great handling, it kind of makes up for a lack of straight line speed, especially on tracks where straight line speed means very little, such as tracks like the Gran Turismo Arena, super tight twisty city courses, and that kind of thing. So, what's the handling like? Well, actually, I would say this is an incredibly good handling car. I think the handling on this car is far better than on the older model. It's very easy to drive. The handling is pin sharp. There's tons of grip, regardless of the tyres that you use. And even with its fully tuned 348 horsepower, it handles itself remarkably well. Far better, in fact, than the road-going versions. The road-going versions of the Lotus Elise, especially the older models, are quite twitchy. They're actually not as good as people think they are. I would say that the Vauxhall VX220, the Tesla Roadster, and various others of a similar type are actually better than the Lotus Elise for handling. This model, though, makes up for that. It has incredibly good steering. As I said, it does exactly what you need it to do when you need it to do it. But does it do that to a high enough degree to be worth using in racing? Well, it's fairly obvious to say that it's great for one-make racing, but then again, so is pretty much any car. So, is it competitive beyond that? Well, yes, I'd say it is. As I already mentioned, city circuits, twisty tracks where you can't really use straight-line power, you're always going to need a vehicle like this if you really want to have a competitive edge. And the great thing about this car, I would say, is in a similar vein to the Cappuccino race car and some others as well, the speed that the car can lap a track in is actually based more on you than the car, because it's based on how far you are willing to push the vehicle, how confident you are in your own driving ability. So this car will pretty much take whatever you throw at it. It just depends how much you throw at it. So is it worth buying? Yeah, I'd say it is. More so, in fact, than the older model, because it's, I would say, slightly more competitive. Overall, though, it goes without saying that you shouldn't expect this car to be an all-conquering monster. And if the opportunity came where you didn't have enough space or money to either buy this or something like an M3, a Z4, a GTR, an R8, a Gillett Vertigo, etc., if it meant that difference, that you would either not have the money for those for the sake of buying this, or vice versa, well then don't buy it, because there are plenty of other GT cars that are faster, purely speaking. But if you've already got the more obvious choices and you want to try something new, or have a small lightweight track weapon in your arsenal for when the need arises, then it's an interesting car to check out. And as far as race cars go, it's also quite a visually understated one, so you may just catch people out by how good this car actually is. But that's it overall for this particular episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.